Desperate Apache's shocking plea. My leg is trapped, rancher. Save me and I'll gift you a child. The afternoon sun dipped low over Arizona's rugged landscape, casting long shadows that crept across the ground. Jake Harris, a man forged by the harsh elements, stood surveying his cattle ranch, his chest heavy with the weight of expectations. With prices plummeting and debt lurking at the edge of his consciousness, each passing day deepened his anxiety, a legacy built by generations now threatened by economic strife. A sudden shout pierced the quiet. "Help, please!" The frantic call yanked Jake from his thoughts. He squinted into the distance and caught sight of a figure struggling in the ravine below, rising dust swirling like a specter around him. As Jake made his way down the rocky slope, he felt the familiar tightness in his chest. A rush of unease mixed with a sense of urgency. Upon reaching the bottom, he found Elias, an Apache man, his leg pinned beneath a sizable rock. Jake's gut twisted. "What happened?" he asked, his voice a murmur against the backdrop of silence. "I can't move. Please!" Elias gasped, desperation crackling in his words. "If you save me, I promise you my future child." The bizarre pledge hung in the air, thickening the tension, turning Jake's task into a moral maze. Jake shook his head, grappling with conflicting emotions. He clenched his fists, the implications of that promise pressing against his conscience like a weight that threatened to bury him. Did he dare to accept a transaction that entwined their fates? "Why would you say something like that?" he challenged, his voice barely above a whisper. The Apache's eyes glimmered with both fear and determination. "I've seen your struggles, rancher. I know you need help as much as I do." A pang of recognition rippled through Jake. He too was caught in the binds of legacy and survival. His family's ranch was all he had, sustained by blood, grit, and sacrifice. Every choice carved a path more treacherous. The sun continued to retreat, a brilliant orange melting into darkening clouds. As Jake anchored himself to free Elias, he became acutely aware of the stakes. What if he failed? What if saving the man came at too high a cost? The unsettling thought spiraled through his mind. Could he gamble on a promise from a man steeped in history and wounds he could barely understand? "Please, rancher!" Elias shouted again, his voice tinged with pain. "Time is running out." Each word struck Jake like a hammer against iron, a reminder that in moments of peril, humanity intertwined in unpredictable ways. Would loyalty lie in blood or in this raw, trembling sincerity? Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. Jake's muscles tightened. His breaths grew uneven as he mixed his own apprehensions with the gravity of the moment. The conflicting urge to preserve Elias's life and the mounting dread clawed at him. What if he freed this man but lost everything he stood for? The growing bond between them now both inspired and terrified him, each second twisting the knife deeper into his conscience. As the light faded, Jake realized that he was standing on a precipice, wrestling with the very essence of what it meant to be a man committed to family and sacrifice. Would he cling to the safety of tradition, or leap into uncharted waters defined by compassion? Shadows encroached, replaying his inner conflict in an endless loop. Time was slipping away, and just when Jake thought he could finally shift the rock, an abrupt noise shattered the stillness. A rustle, a snap. All focus shifted, both men frozen as the darkening silence stood between them and the uncertain path ahead. The crack echoed like thunder, jolting Jake from his internal battle. The sound signaled urgency that sliced through his indecision. He could either retreat to the safety of his life or lean into the chaos, risking everything for a stranger. In that moment, he understood that Elias's life, and perhaps his own fate, teetered on the brink of his next decision. Focusing hard, Jake gathered his resolve. Cracking his knuckles in a primal gesture of determination, he bent down to assess the situation with newfound clarity. The rock loomed large, but familiar instincts wrestled within him. Each second stretched painfully thin as his mind raced with memories of the ranch, the soil tilled by his forefathers, the cows grazing peacefully. They all relied on him, and yet, so did Elias. "Hold still," Jake commanded, shoving aside thoughts of what lay ahead. He felt anger pulse through him, not at the stranger before him, but at the crushing weight of expectations that nested in his chest. Here stood a choice, one that could become a personal turning point. He placed his hands firmly on the boulder and grunted, feeling the grit of the earth beneath his fingers. Elias winced, yet his eyes never left Jake. They were two men from vastly different worlds, yet caught in an intersection of desperation and hope. And in the shared silence, Jake realized this moment was tethered to something larger than either man: sacrifice, survival, and the sheer audacity to hope when faced with insurmountable odds. With every ounce of strength, he pushed against the rock, grunting as he strained. The weight shifted just slightly. Hope flickered, a fragile thing that could grow if nurtured. The Apache man cried out, each sound mixing pain with urgency, urging Jake on. It ignited a fire of determination within him, pushing past the limits where self-preservation ended and altruism began. What felt like an eternity passed, yet Jake could feel the resolve blooming in his chest. The rock shifted again, inching higher, and with a final ferocious push, he broke the constraints holding Elias in place. The giant stone toppled away, leaving a dusting of debris that settled around them like a fragile blanket. "Thank you," Elias gasped, dragging himself from the grasp of danger. His leg was mangled, but he was alive. Jake exhaled, realizing that the choice he made outside the bounds of fear offered him clarity, a depth of understanding he hadn't anticipated. "You're free now," he breathed, the weight shifting from his shoulders to a newfound sense of purpose. But amidst the relief, a thought crept in, shadowing the moment. The promise lingered like an echo in the canyon, as much a gift of hope as a burden of expectation. Settling back against the rough rock, Jake pondered the implications of Elias's pledge. Could he accept what Elias offered, knowing that it was rooted in powerful traditions he barely understood? The sun dipped even lower in the sky, casting them deeper into murky twilight, a time between light and dark, much like Jake's own uncertainty. He was no longer just a rancher fighting for survival. Something had ignited within him. The stakes had escalated from livestock to life, from tradition to transformation. "Jake," Elias murmured, his breath ragged but filled with earnestness, "I have much to teach you, if you're willing to listen." Jake felt a chill slide down his spine, not out of fear but from the weight of possibility. If the promise of knowledge and growth lay ahead, what new paths would he forge from this moment? And yet, as he nodded, accepting not just the man's gratitude but also his offer, a shudder rippled through the ground, an omen. Nature was signaling once more, and Jake couldn't shake the feeling that this new chapter would test him in ways he couldn't yet comprehend. The question loomed heavy in the air. What lay beyond this act of compassion? What challenges awaited him now that he had stepped beyond the familiar lines of his existence? The vivid colors of twilight began to bleed into one another as Jake processed the gravity of Elias's words. The Apache man's promise dangled in the air, an alluring yet weighty proposition. What would it mean to accept his offer? To delve into the depths of tradition and learn from someone whose world he barely understood? Could that learning lead to a transformation not just in skill, but in identity? Jake's heart raced with the tension between fear and curiosity. He had always been a man of the land, tethered to the cycles of nature, but now he was teetering on the brink of an entirely different existence. As Elias shifted uncomfortably, groaning softly in pain, Jake's attention snapped back to the immediate reality. Elias needed aid, and urgency still hung in the air like the last rays of daylight. "Do you need anything?" Jake asked, the question instinctual as he fought to realign his focus. He was a rancher first, even as the prospect of exploration beckoned. "I need to rest and find a way to tend to this injury," Elias replied, wincing at the pain radiating from his leg. "But I also need you to understand the importance of our connection, Jake. What I can offer is more than knowledge. It's a bond that could change your life forever." The gravity of the statement weighed heavily on both men. Jake's mind swirled with images of the ranch, the life he had built singularly. Yet this chance encounter was provoking thoughts of legacy. Would he risk everything he knew for something fundamentally unknown? "Let's get you comfortable first," Jake responded, utilizing his practical skills to gather twigs and leaves from the nearby landscape. The sky transformed overhead, and with each rustle of the foliage, a small act of care soothed the tumult within him. Elias watched closely. You carry an old spirit, Jake, one that longs for something greater. The strength you showed in saving me is not merely physical, it stems from a deep well of untapped potential. Jake squinted at the words, his internal defenses rising momentarily. But what do I know about your ways or your traditions? How can a rancher from a different world truly understand what you offer? More than you realize, Elias asserted, growing steadier despite his injury. Every action, every decision you make shapes the path ahead. You've already taken the first step by not walking away, by opting to engage. That's the heart of our culture. The tension coiled tighter within Jake. The resonance of Elias's belief struck chords in him he wasn't ready to acknowledge. He felt pulled toward the unknown, yet anchored by fear of what it could mean for the life he had always known. What if I accept this, with no knowledge of what it entails? Jake challenged. The question hung between them, charged with possibility. Embrace the uncertainty, Jake. Transforming yourself may require you to shed the very identity that defines you. You may emerge stronger, with capacities you never knew resided within, Elias countered, his gaze steady. Jake flicked his gaze toward the horizon, where the last remnants of sunlight faded and shadows deepened. This moment, while fragmented and far from resolved, illuminated an undeniable truth. The desire for growth outweighed the comfort of familiarity. As Elias began to rest, Jake's mind drifted, wrestling with the implications of change. He would need to confront head-on the world he had been immersed in his entire life and confront the insecurities lying just beneath the surface. A sudden rustle echoed from the edge of the canyon. His instincts kicked in as Jake shifted, aware that their sanctuary might not remain untouched much longer. He glanced at Elias, who looked equally alert, recognition dawning in their shared silence. The real test was upon them, a confrontation he had not foreseen. As figures materialized out of the growing darkness, Jake's heart thudded violently. The true challenge of embarking on this uncertain path had just begun. Would he have the strength to protect not only himself, but the knowledge that could redefine his life? The imminent unknown loomed heavier than ever. The figures that emerged from the shadows brought with them an unsettling pulse of danger. Jake's heart quickened. He counted 3 silhouettes against the fading light. Each step they took was marked by an unsettling confidence, a stark contrast to the vulnerability he felt at that moment. He instinctively took a protective stance, positioning himself slightly in front of Elias, aware that this unexpected confrontation was more than just a threat to his physical safety. "Who are you?" Jake's voice trembled only slightly, strength laced within. The last remnants of dusk hung heavy, thickening the atmosphere. The foremost figure stepped into the dim light, face etched with a hard resolve. "We're here for him," the man growled, gesturing toward Elias. "He's got something that belongs to us." A flicker of fear mingled with defiance surged through Jake. Protecting Elias felt instinctual, yet daunting. "He's hurt. You need to leave," Jake asserted, his tone more commanding than he felt within. The group shared glances, an unspoken agreement coursing between them. "It's not a negotiation. The Apache doesn't belong with you. He should have stayed hidden," the leader spat, stepping closer, asserting dominance. Elias shifted, his feverish gaze settling on Jake. "They're seeking something from me, an ancient knowledge that they believe they're entitled to. This is not just a conflict for my life, but for those who would challenge my path." The menace from the advancing figures swallowed the air. Jake's mind raced as he formulated an approach. The rancher in him remained rooted to principles of protection and loyalty, yet the inexplicable connection to Elias hinted at a destiny much larger than himself. "But what do you gain from this?" Jake pressed, facing the menacing trio head-on. The urgency of the moment sharpened his instincts, forcing analysis and action into juxtaposition. "The land he knows," the leader explained, eyes glinting with greed, "holds secrets that give power to those like us. He dares to share that knowledge with outsiders. That can't stand." At that moment, Jake felt a surge of clarity within the chaos. He realized that this conflict was not only about Elias, but also about the path he stood on. The fear of stepping into the unknown gripped him, and yet, it now seemed overshadowed by the urgency of righting a profound wrong. Jake took a deliberate step forward, hand instinctively reaching for the knife at his side. You're wrong to think he's a pawn in your game. He's a protector of traditions, and if that's what you seek, you'll have to go through me first. Staring into the eyes of the men, Jake found strength, a deep well of courage he had only glimpsed before. Perhaps this reckoning was more than a physical confrontation. It was tied intricately to his rebirth, a necessary trial. You think you're brave, rancher? The leader mocked, but a flicker of uncertainty betrayed him. You don't know what we're capable of. Maybe not, Jake replied, drawing upon newfound resolve. But I know what I have to protect. The darkened sky loomed overhead, a cosmic witness to the transformative moment before him. In this tumult, Jake could sense the threads of his identity unraveling and reweaving into something new, a confrontational spirit that might redefine both himself and his future. Just then, the wind whispered warnings, swirling cold and tumultuous. Jake sensed both a danger and an opportunity, a push toward embracing the unknown Elias had mentioned. What lay ahead required not just the realization of his own potential, but the commitment to honor a bond forged through trials. As he braced himself for what was to come, he understood that the upcoming battle was not just against external foes, but also against the shadows within, the doubts that threatened to eclipse his awakening. Suddenly, a sudden rustle erupted from behind the intruders, a rustle that announced yet another challenger. Jake's pulse quickened. The test was far from over, and the stakes continued to soar as the path toward self-discovery twisted into new uncertainties. Would he rise to meet every challenge, or would he crumble beneath the weight of expectations and fear? As the wind swirled menacingly, Jake steeled himself, ready to confront whatever darkness lay ahead. A tense silence enveloped the scene as the rustle from behind the intruders grew louder, revealing a figure emerging from the shadows, panic evident in his eyes. The newcomer appeared disheveled, his clothing torn and mud-stained, as if he had been on the run. Jake realized this was not just a spectator. This was someone in need of salvation, a desperate plea in a chaotic situation. "Help me! My leg is trapped!" the man shouted, voice laced with desperation. "If you can get me out, I swear I'll offer you something in return. Just help me." Jake's mind raced. The situation had spiraled far beyond a simple confrontation over Elias. The intruders' expressions shifted, their focus flickered between Jake and the man in distress. They seemed caught off guard, momentarily divided in their commitment to their cause. Jake seized the opportunity, his heart pounding with a mix of adrenaline and fear. "Focus on me," he called to the trapped figure. "What do I need to do?" "Push the boulder off. It's trapped underneath, just a little more to the side," the man gasped, gesturing wildly. Jake observed the shape of the dark outline against the evening light. All thought began converging on this one act. It could be a distraction, or perhaps a necessary risk that not only served his own survival, but could also forge a connection to Elias, a connection to something larger than himself. With a glimmer of willpower igniting his muscles, he pushed through doubts clouding his mind. The task at hand felt monumental, yet Jake's resolve grew as he squared his shoulders, directing his focus inward. The ranch life had long taught him about living in tandem with the land. Sometimes the most difficult tasks bore the most valuable fruits. As he approached the boulder, a cacophony of threats loomed nearby. He dared a glance back at Elias, who remained steadfast despite vulnerability etched all over his face. The governmental shadows still glared at him. But was Jake ready to take on such weight, both physically and metaphysically? "It's now or never," he muttered, the mantra echoing in his gut. With a firm grip on the rock, his muscles tensed, protesting under the strain as he heaved. The boulder shifted slightly at first, then more aggressively as he summoned every ounce of strength within him. Thoughts flashed through his mind, contemplating the enormity of this action. This was more than a test of physical power. It was a breaking point in his identity, an awakening. Behind him, the leader of the intruders scowled, barking commands to his accomplices to refocus on Jake. The tension escalated, and Jake felt the pressure of their collective gaze. But as he gritted his teeth to push harder, a sudden swell of energy surged through him, driven by the knowledge that he had to act, not just for the man at the boulder, but also for his own burgeoning identity. He was standing on the precipice of defining who he could be. With one final heave, the boulder rolled aside. "Now, grab his leg!" Jake directed urgently as the man scrambled towards safety. The sense of urgency pulsed within him as the figure regained his composure. Adrenaline poured into his veins, and there was no turning back. The path of life forged ahead seemed twisted, yet there was clarity within the chaos now. This stranger had sparked a new resolve in Jake, enabling him to confront not only impending foes, but also unveiling parts of himself previously hidden. A loud crack echoed as the intruders prepared to charge, their patience shredded. Jake turned towards them, his eyes reflecting a fierceness he hadn't realized burned within. "I'm not finished with you yet," he shouted, feeling the weight of the moment crystallize into purpose. But before he could execute his newfound determination, the man shouted something that sent an electrifying chill down Jake's spine. "If you help me, I'll give you something more invaluable than you can imagine. A future, a legacy." Jake's heart raced as he grappled with the implications. What had just been an urgent battle for survival was morphing into something deeper, a quest for meaning. Now, the key to his path, descendants, purpose, continuity, loomed directly before him. Would he take the leap into this promise even as darkness approached? As Jake stood at the intersection of desperation and determination, he couldn't shake the feeling that each moment brought him closer to a life-altering decision. The next revelation beckoned as the very ground began to quake. Would Jake rise to grasp it, or would the shadows reclaim him? The world around Jake seemed to pulse with a frantic energy, the tension thick enough to slice. As the intruders advanced, he was caught in a vortex of conflict, surging waves of adrenaline intertwining with profound uncertainty. The promise of a legacy, whispered amid chaos, echoed in his mind. It beckoned him not just as a call for help, but as a pivotal choice that could redefine him. He fought against the weight of indecision, feeling eyes from the shadows bore down upon him. The man he had just freed staggered backward, his breath ragged but determination mirrored in his gaze. "You don't understand. The choice you make now isn't just about this moment. It's about everything that comes after," the man urged, fear and desperation woven together in his tone. Each heartbeat pulsed through Jake, quickening as he realized the risks. Turning to face the intruders, he grasped the gravity of his choice. Intervening could mean the end of everything he held dear. Yet the thought of passing up the chance for connection, purpose, a legacy, ignited something fierce within him. "You're right," Jake said, voice low but steadied with newfound strength. "I won't let fear dictate my path anymore." The resolve crystallized. Here was the opportunity to confront not only the dangers before him, but also the shadows within himself. This was a moment of initiation, a line drawn firmly in the sand. "Then stand with me," the stranger urged, a flicker of hope trailing behind his words. His legs still pained, but urgency surged in his voice as he crafted a plan. "Together, we can distract them and fight back. They think they have the upper hand, but we can challenge that." "Let's turn the tables," Jake agreed, eyeing the intruders with a newfound ferocity. There was no retreating now. He would not allow external chaos to dictate his choices. With the perception that he was not alone, he executed the plan with precision. They flanked the menacing figures together, surprising the attackers with their audacity. With every movement, Jake felt his confidence solidifying. He swiftly redirected his fear into action, striking with calculated precision while the intruders scrambled to regain composure. Their confusion was palpable, and for the first time, Jake caught a glimpse of their vulnerabilities. He was no longer the passive participant in this struggle. He was an active player on a dynamic battlefield. "Keep pressing!" he shouted, adrenaline coursing through him as the tide began to shift. With each advance, Jake could feel a sense of purpose radiating outward, bolstered by the fiery will of the man who had once trembled beneath the boulder. It was a beautiful paradox. Salvation had rooted itself in collaboration, in shared hardship, forging a bond deeper than mere survival. The momentum quickened. Each strike became not only a counterforce against the intruders, but a testament to his growth. Jake understood that the battle before him was more than physical. It was a reclamation of his identity, an intertwining of his fate with that of the man at his side. But just as their efforts started to fracture the confidence of their opponents, a howl of rage erupted from the leader of the intruders. "You think you can win? You've made a grave mistake." In an instant, chaos erupted anew, enemies pressing from all angles. The shift in the air spun Jake's thoughts tight. They were far from safe. All this forging of identity could crumble with one ill-timed move. What lay in the heart of confrontation now? The answer dangled tantalizingly close. Would he rise to harness the full potential of his newfound bravery? Or would the defiance they had ignited unravel into fear once more? As Jake ducked a flying object aimed in his direction, the implications of his choices unfurled ominously around him, leaving the next step unsure. The echoes of his conviction reverberated in his chest, demanding clarity as the world became engulfed in noise once more. Jake's pulse throbbed in his temples, each beat an urgent reminder that the stakes had never felt higher. The conflict swirling around him threatened to consume him entirely. As he grappled with the fraying threads of the moment, an uneasy realization unfurled. Fear was not the end of his journey. It could be transformed into something much greater. The attackers surged forward, emboldened by the leader's bellow. Jake's instincts screamed for him to shrink back, to retreat into safety. Instead, he straightened his spine, the resolve he had summoned beginning to embolden him. In that moment of chaos, he glanced at the stranger beside him, whose determination crackled like static electricity between them. They were now bound by a shared purpose, thrust into a chaotic dance that blurred the lines between uncertainty and bravery. There was no time to ponder the possible consequences of his actions. A decision was demanded by the frenetic battle before him. "We need to split them up," Jake shouted, his voice cutting through the din. The stranger nodded, immediately grasping the unspoken plan. They would no longer be pawns. They would become strategists, re-engaging the fight on their terms. In one fluid motion, Jake and his ally darted toward the fringes of the fray, where the attackers were clustered in arrogance. As they made their move, Jake felt the walls of his hesitance begin to crumble. Striking with the precision he had only recently unearthed within himself, he found his footing, grounding each movement in an awakened authority. The intruders began to falter, their confidence shaken as uncertainty crept into their ranks. Jake's heart raced with adrenaline, yet steadied itself with clarity. The realization that he wasn't just fighting for survival, this was about asserting his identity. Every blow he delivered pulsed with the message that he would no longer be a passive observer of his own life. He was here, and he would matter. "Keep going, don't let up," the man urged, echoing Jake's fiery resolve. They fought in sync, blows landing with a rhythm as old as mankind itself, an instinctive harmony forged through shared struggle. Each interaction, each connection, was a reaffirmation of their emerging partnership, threading the hope of victory into the fabric of chaos. But as they pressed on, the leader of the intruders, a well-sculpted figure with a ruthless gaze, repositioned himself. His mouth curved into a grim smile, a predator sensing a weakness. "You're playing a dangerous game, boy," he spat, a low menace curling around his words. "Your strength will be your undoing." Jake's breath hitched. Fear threatened to claw its way back, urging him to doubt his abilities. He caught himself, the familiar shadows creeping in. This was the moment. Either embrace his newfound resolve or retreat into the remnants of a self once shackled by uncertainty. The weight of possibility hung heavy in the air, so he steadied himself, unwavering. In that heartbeat, visions of failure whirled in his mind. But intertwined with that fear was the image of a life free from the binds of indecision, a legacy worth fighting for. The realization that the true battle lay not just in the struggle against his adversaries, but against the internal conflicts that had once held him captive brought forth a steely determination. With renewed ferocity, Jake faced the leader head-on, abandoning the illusions of retreat and self-doubt. "I won't back down," he declared, each syllable infusing his fight with purpose. The fire in his chest surged as he advanced, ready to confront both the adversary and the lingering remnants of fear that had once paralyzed him. As the two locked eyes, Jake saw something shift, a flicker of concern masked by the intruder's bravado. The leader's grip tightened on his weapon. The climactic moment hung like a taut wire about to snap. Would this confrontation catalyze the evolution Jake sought? Or would it unravel the progress he had made? The answer awaited him just beyond the threshold of bravery and fear. The ground felt sharper beneath his feet, a reminder that choices held weight. A decision point had formed. Each breath he took was a step closer to either advancement or collapse. The upcoming clash would reveal the essence of Jake's transformation. Had he ultimately harnessed the chaos, or would he remain trapped in its thrall? The clash ignited in a flurry of motion, a whirlwind of fists and ferocity. Jake lunged forward, infused with adrenaline and a fierce determination. He had the advantage of surprise, the aspect of initiative rippling through every sinew in his body. The hardened expression on his opponent's face was juxtaposed with the burning resolve within him. For too long, Jake had acted in the shadows, swallowed by self-doubt. This was now his fight, and he was ready to claim it. As Jake moved, he could almost hear the furious drum of his own heartbeat. Each strike was not just an attempt to defend himself, but an embodiment of every moment he had hesitated, every opportunity he had let slip through his fingers. Behind him, he could feel the presence of his ally, a symbiotic force that strengthened the core of his newfound identity. Together they were reshaping the narrative, shifting from mere survivalists to warriors with agency. "You're stronger than you think," the stranger shouted amidst the chaos, firing Jake's convictions even higher. The words settled deep within him, sparking a realization. It was not merely about raw physical strength. It was about resilience, about courage forged through trial. Jake had navigated the labyrinth of his own mind before this very moment, and now he stood at the gateway of transformation. He surged forward again, his blows now guided by a focused intention that matched his emotional upheaval. The leader's smirk faltered, uncertainty painting his features as he parried Jake's next strike. The sheer tenacity of the boy before him began to undermine the confidence that had fueled the attack. In that moment, Jake observed the shifting tides. It was a raw manifestation of the psychological battle he had waged all his life within himself. He was learning to navigate both the external confrontation and the internal breakthrough simultaneously. With a feint to the left, Jake struck again, eliciting a grunt from his adversary. The thrill of empowerment coursed through his veins, replacing the fear that had once threatened to consume him. This wasn't merely physical combat. It had morphed into a duel for identity, revealing layers of self-worth buried beneath the debris of insecurity. Jake had turned fear into fire, and it radiated from him. But as he engaged in this rhythmic violence, he felt a sudden looseness in his body. For a fleeting instant, he questioned if his newfound techniques could sustain against the seasoned ferocity of his opponent. Was he truly equipped to handle this? Would history repeat itself, forcing him again into the recesses of self-doubt? Pushing that vulnerable thought aside, Jake realized that his proficiency had developed alongside his emotional growth. He had discovered agility in both mind and body, a connection that gave him strength. As he moved to avoid another blow, Jake considered how far he had come. Decisions taken in moments of fear had shaped him into a fighter. "Together!" Jake shouted, galvanizing his ally as they erupted into a synchronized offensive. The chaos became a dance, two bodies united in the fight against adversity. The more they communicated through their movements, the clearer the vision of success became. Jake's internal landscape had shifted radically. He envisioned victory not just as a conclusion, but as an ongoing process of becoming, a continually evolving self forged in steel and struggle. In a decisive moment, Jake found an opening, a vulnerability flash in his enemy's defenses. The leader, off balance following an exchange, faltered in his response. Surrounding chaos faded, and Jake's focus zeroed in on this potential turning point. Capturing this moment could solidify everything he had fought for, the assertion of his power against the shadows that once gripped him. As he moved in, one thought pierced through the air with clarity and resolve. This is where it changes. The gulf of uncertainty loomed, but Jake was no longer standing at the precipice. He was ready to leap, to forge ahead into whatever fate awaited him on the other side of this moment. Would he emerge triumphant, or would failure claw back at him from the other side of success? Just as Jake prepared to seize that symbolic moment, a piercing scream resonated above the clamor, cutting through the haze of battle. It was a cry of frustration, of desperation. What unexpected turn awaited him next, and how would it challenge the very foundation of the resolve he had fought to build? The scream hung in the air, reverberating inside Jake's chest, pulling him momentarily from the conflict surrounding him. The urgency in that voice was palpable, and it shattered the exhilaration of the fight. Every instinct screamed to address this desperation, to reconcile the tumult of aggression with the unsettling plea that echoed in his ears. It was a discord that left him breathless. Jake's eyes darted toward the source of the cry. Across the scuffle, he spotted a figure curled on the ground, a wounded Apache, face grimaced in agony. The sight jolted him. Here was a person in immediate distress, a stark reminder that their battle, while crucial, paled against the raw urgency of individual suffering. That clash of responsibility struck hard. He was in the midst of reclaiming his assertive identity when confronted by a moment uncharted and fraught with moral complications. The very essence of personal growth now demanded a choice: continue the fight for power or respond to an anguished plea for help. The inflection of the stranger's voice, raw and desperate, kindled a spark within Jake that couldn't be ignored. He scaled the walls of this internal turmoil, grappling with the instinctual desire to dominate the fight juxtaposed against a dawning realization that true strength could also manifest as compassion and bravery. Would he be a warrior infused solely with aggression, or could he embody the broader spectrum of what it meant to fight for something deeper than mere victory? "Jake, focus!" the ally shouted, snapping him back. The urgency was palpable, but Jake's eyes were glued to the Apache, whose leg had become ensnared beneath the rubble of a fallen beam. "Help me!" the Apache cried out, the plea a visceral echo that reverberated in Jake's core. "I am not your enemy." Jake's heart clenched. The notion of collaboration, even in the midst of chaos, began to crystallize, and the weight of his decision pressed down heavily on his shoulders. He took a decisive breath, catching a glimpse of the battlefield that raged around him. The fight needed to be won, yet the struggle to aid another was equally demanding. Both were acts of defiance against the forces that sought to crush him. With a steely resolve, he turned to his ally and shouted, "Cover me!" There was no turning back now. Jake plunged forward, weaving through the turmoil as he narrowed his focus to the desperate figure on the ground. Each sprint was punctuated by the thrumming of his heartbeat, a reminder that he was alive and acutely aware that his choices would shape not just his destiny, but also the fate of another. As he reached the Apache, Jake knelt beside him. "Hold on," he urged, inspecting the trapped leg. The beam was heavy and jagged, but the pain in the man's expression ignited the urgency within Jake. Moments turned into an eternity as he pushed through the skeletal debris, the sheer enormity of the interaction breaking down the walls of his previously narrow perspective. He gripped the beam, feeling its weight, the sweat pooling at his brow becoming a testament to both physically demanding rescue and the internal struggle to redefine what it meant to be a warrior. "On 3, he grunted, summoning his strength, his focus now solely on this singular act of salvation. 1, 2, 3. They heaved together, a concerted effort born out of necessity, as the beam shifted, freeing the Apache's leg. Relief flooded Jake's senses, not only from the physical effort, but also the emotional upheaval of recognizing that courage sometimes necessitated stepping beyond oneself. With a sharp intake of breath, the Apache released a groan of pain followed by gratitude. "Thank you," he whispered, eyes wide with both relief and something Jake couldn't quite place. Was it vulnerability, or perhaps a new form of connection forged in the flames of conflict? Yet as fate would have it, just as Jake began to process that connection, the distant roar of approaching vehicles captured his attention. A new storm was coming, one that forced him to confront the truth of his recent choices. Would his newfound identity withstand the coming storm, or would it fracture as he waded deeper into complexities he had only just begun to understand? "Get ready," Jake muttered under his breath, a resolute determination settling in as the vehicles drew closer. His next decision awaited, a pivotal moment that could redefine everything, both for himself and for an ally who had become more than just a faceless stranger. The thunderous rumble of the approaching vehicles echoed ominously, sending a shiver through Jake and the Apache man at his side. The reality of their situation loomed large and painfully clear. They were under siege, not just from the threatening intruders, but also from a very real battle for survival. Jake felt the gravity of each moment coalescing into a renewed sense of determination. The fight was no longer merely for his own identity, but for the lives intertwined with his. Jake's heart thudded against his chest, an unmistakable drumbeat of focus. His recent acts of liberation had unveiled layers of courage and integrity within him, but now he had to uphold that transformation against imminent danger. As he rose, dust swirled around him, and each breath filled his lungs with the conviction that he would face whatever came next head-on. "Stay close," Jake instructed, gesturing to the Apache who had just been freed. The man's leg was battered, but the sheer will to stand rebroke the bonds of helplessness in Jake's eyes. The Apache nodded, the fire in his eyes reflecting an unspoken bond of understanding. They were now united not just by circumstance, but by shared purpose. The vehicle skidded to a halt, engines growling, releasing a cloud of dust that hung heavy in the air like a portent of the confrontation that loomed ahead. Shadows emerged from the depths of the trucks, figures sharp against the setting sun, etched against the backdrop of Jake's awakening courage. There was no turning back now. Their collective fate hung in the balance, built upon moments of brotherhood forged through doubt and fear. In that instant, Jake felt the rush of blood pulsing through him, a surge of empowerment that battled against the whispers of self-doubt. He had pushed through the limits of his prior self. Now he was poised to claim his place in a larger narrative, one that demanded active participation rather than passive acceptance. "Hey, over here!" Jake shouted, rooted firmly, voice booming as he projected confidence into the encroaching chaos. The hostile figures trained their gazes on him, eyes narrowing, smiles widening in a malicious semblance of delight. "This is your last chance to walk away," the leader of the interlopers barked, his bravado steeped in arrogance. Yet, behind the leader's bravado, Jake detected flickers of unease that betrayed how quickly confidence ebbed in the presence of resolute defiance. "I'm not afraid of you," Jake replied coolly, the fire igniting within him as he stood resolute. His defiance unfolded, revealing the truth he had begun to understand. The heart of courage remained in the willingness to confront the unknown. "You think you can save him?" Jake motioned toward the Apache man, who leaned heavily against a tree, breathing deep. "We're not backing down. You associate bravery with aggression, yet true courage is found in compassion. You've lost that." A ripple of tension surged through the ranks of the intruders. They hesitated as they realized they were not merely facing a desperate rancher. They were up against a man transformed, courageous enough to stand firm against fading traditions of violence. This act of defiance invoked something greater, a resolve to protect, to forge a new identity steeped in respect and understanding. "You want power? Take it!" the leader sneered, undeterred by the doubt now rising in his men. Yet Jake maintained eye contact, aware that every battle required an equal dose of intimidation paired with unwavering conviction. Then from behind him, the Apache man spoke, his voice a low rumble imbued with authority. "You've threatened my people for too long. This ends today. Will you be the masters of violence, or will you seek redemption instead?" The interlopers' expressions shifted once more, confusion mingling with disbelief. Each word spoke volumes, and the once animated aggressors now stood still, as if caught in a moment of realization. Redemption, the concept hung between them, daring them to reconsider their place, their purpose. It was a brave step, not just for Jake, but also for the Apache. Through their shared experience, they had solidified an alliance that highlighted the fragility of old narratives and the power of new beginnings. This unusual camaraderie wouldn't guarantee ease, yet it promised strength developed in adversity. The tension fractured as one of the intruders flickered uncertainty in his stance, arms falling slightly, as if the burden of expectation weighed heavier than their aggression. Sensing the shift, Jake seized the moment, stepping closer, feeling a new sense of purpose pulsing through him. "Together we can choose a different path," he conveyed with earnestness, threads of hope weaving through every syllable. "You don't have to let anger and aggression dictate your existence. That cycle can end here." A murmur of dissent echoed through the ranks, and the leader snarled in resistance, yet Jake felt emboldened. He confronted not just the incoming threat, but also the deep-rooted concerns of past choices. It was as if this moment had crystallized everything he had ever sought: belonging, understanding, respect, and ultimately, legacy. With that realization blossoming within, Jake stepped forward one last time, hands raised in a gesture of peace. "I will stand for him, as he stands for all of us. If you seek power, discover it in the bonds we can forge, together." In that suspended moment, Jake witnessed the hesitance ripple further through the intruders. A tempestuous struggle played out in their expressions as they weighed their pride against the uncertain potential of forgiveness, acceptance, and collaboration. The leader's defiance shattered, replaced by a crack as he blinked, reconsidering his stance. As charged silence enveloped them, Jake understood the true essence of courage. the decision to step forward, to risk rejection for the possibility of change. In that pivotal moment, he realized he had not just defended his present, he had redefined the concept of legacy, the promise of a future forged by united strength, not by division. Yes, fear still lingered around the edges of his resolve, but it was now overshadowed by audacity and hope. And as acrid tension diffused and retreated, Jake recognized the emergence of a vital opportunity. The result of courage was not merely surviving the fight, it was wielding the potential for growth stitched through adversity, not just for himself but for everyone that stood before him. As shadows gradually receded, Jake's identity crested like dawn breaking through the darkness. He stood a rancher no longer just fighting for survival, but a bridge builder linking together paths towards a shared destiny. Having called upon strength from within, he would rebuild a legacy rooted in compassion rather than conflict, a legacy that would echo through generations to come. This was the moment he had awaited so long. Every obstacle faced had prepared him for this precise call to action. As the tendrils of hope unfurled within him, he knew he would rise with unwavering courage, savoring the victory of not only transforming himself but also reclaiming the unity of existence. The palpable awakening reverberated through the hearts of all gathered, drawing together a collective spirit ready to rise. Now, as the dust settled, the resolve surged through Jake, a singular moment where everything had changed for the better. The dawn of redemption glimmered ahead, a raw canvas of possibility stretching toward the horizon, finally illuminated by the colors of newfound purpose. In this awakening, Jake had achieved what many covet yet seldom find, a profound understanding of his identity, and with it, the foundation of a legacy built not upon conflict, but on compassion and connection. And as he prepared to step into the light of the future, Jake held on to the promise of the Apache's pledge, aware that alongside growth comes responsibility, a responsibility not just to himself, but to the world waiting to be shaped by their stories. The legacy of tomorrow was locked within this moment, a call to action awaiting the brave. Now is the time. Subscribe immediately to the channel to not miss the next exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm. Your support matters. Comment your reactions and theories about the ending. Your voice is crucial. Share instantly this story with at least 5 friends who need to see this breathtaking conclusion. You need to subscribe now. Don't wait even one more second to share. True fans of personal overcoming stories understand the importance of supporting the channel through these actions.